Welcome to day 3 of the Norway Chess 2020, a live Super Grandmaster tournament being held in Stavanger, Norway, with a unique format, classical chess, and if the game ends in a draw, a 10 minutes for white, 7 minute for black Armageddon, where if black draws the game, black wins, and obviously a unique scoring system. Today, we have Aryan Tari with the white pieces versus Magnus Carslen with the black pieces, a matchup of the two top Norwegian players, but actually they haven't played it over the board game in 8 years. Let's see what happens. Tari begins things with e4, c5, and the players go out to this Sicilian. Normally, instead of e5, normally Magnus plays e5, which is the Sveshnikov, very theoretical system. Here he goes for d6. Now, this is called the classical Sicilian, and this particular variation with bishop g5 is known as the Rouser Sicilian. Those of you that play the Sicilian might know that these systems are very sharp, oftentimes leading to black castling short and white castling long, and so a lot of different attacking possibilities. And in general, black puts the pawns like this, puts the bishops behind the knights, not very active, but then launches a queenside attack and decides what to do with the king. And that's exactly what Magnus does, literally. He plays, this way. White's general plan is to decide whether to put the pawn on f3 or f4, where on these two squares you're going to put the pawn, and then decide which way you're going to attack. Now, the most critical moment here happens, first of all, you can't take because this. So you block up your king, put the queen like this, and the real point of this game is going to be won and lost on these sets of squares. This is a very nice move, f5. The point is to damage the structure and plop the knight on d5, where it puts a ton of pressure. At the same time, Magnus just castles, and now what Tari should have done here, I think he was on his own from a theoretical standpoint, he didn't know the theory here, is to play g3. And the point of this is to go bishop to h3 and just put more pressure on that pawn. You need to make this pawn move or take so that you can play knight to d5. And if this pawn doesn't move, you will play moves like knight e2, bring the knight to f4, and just maximize the pressure there. Black will try to fight back on the dark squares. So king b8, it played in the game after bishop to d3, king to b8, knight e2, and we see him kind of going for this plan. Now Magnus does exactly what I said. So very complicated strategic battle. Bishop e2, and now Magnus thought here for a while and played the move d5. Very aggressive, very bold, trying to wreck this position. And after pawn takes d5, well, he played a move which is the reason why he's on the thumbnail, eating a triple stack burger, pawn takes f5. And when he played them, he could have done a lot of things here. He could have played bishop b7, maintained the tension, because again, this is a pin here. Well, I was incredibly shocked to see pawn takes f5, and so was my co-host, Mr. Hikaru. You can check exactly what was his reaction. What did Magnus just do?
I don't know.
You gotta look at this.
Okay,
this man just, he just tripled
What is that? Okay, Magnus just creates a tower of power. So this is a bad tower of power.
So obviously at first we were super shocked to see this because it's crazy in the middle of a game to get tripled isolated pawns. That doesn't make any sense. But in chess, you have something called a strategic standpoint of a position and a dynamic standpoint of a position, or static versus dynamic. And traditionally, tripled pawns like this are bad. They're just not good. I mean, they're a liability, they're not mobile. But when you put all the pawns just on the same line, there's a lot of open lines elsewhere. So the two central files are open. The G file is wide open. And really the diagonals here are open for the pieces. And White's king is here. So Magnus offsets the fact that strategically he's not doing very well by tucking his king to the corner, and he's going to use the B file to attack Aryan's king. And so Aryan kind of put all of the right pieces on the right squares. You'll note that his knights are very strong, his pawns are protecting against invasion, this is covering knight here, and Aryan thought here for a very long time and played a move which loses the game. And the reason why this move loses the game, it looks like you're creating, an attack on that, but it's too slow, and the knight doesn't belong on this side of the board. In flies knight c4, and it gets really bad very quickly. But that's the difficult thing about, chess. the engine here gives like a very convoluted way to play. So first of all, it wants you to play d6, which looks like it loses a pawn 2 different ways. But if you play queen takes d6, now it wants queen to c3 with a discovered attack threat. And if you just return back, now this square has been freed up for the knight. So essentially, the engine wants to find a clearance sacrifice here, a combination of d6, queen c3, and knight d5. If you play bishop takes d6, we have the same problem, knight d5, queen to b7 hitting this, but now the knight hits this, and now the pawns actually start to fall apart. So d6 is a beautiful move. And if Magnus were to play something like bishop c6, now knight takes f5. I actually don't know if Magnus saw or didn't see this. Maybe he thought he would create some counterplay. But again, this is what the engine wants. It wants d6, queen c3, stabilizing, and white is winning, apparently. But knight c4 and the game goes downhill. So rook b8, and here, rook to f3 was played because rook e3 was the threat, trying to deflect the queen and this. And now, well, I can flip it if you'd like. You can pause here. You're now looking down at the king. Black to move and find the only winning move. An absolutely beautiful tactical shot. Pause here if you'd like. Give you a few seconds. Take a sip this time of my wine. It's late. Like 9 p.m. You know, I streamed 11 hours today. And now I'm making this recap. So I can drink some red wine. Rook f3 and an absolutely beautiful move. Rook to e1. Rook to e1. Yeah. So first of all, if queen takes, that's mate. And if the rook takes, which is the only other move, let me flip it back now. Actually, nah. Let's keep it from Magnus's perspective. It's more fun this way. Hits the queen and hits. Queen before offering a trade. Beautiful move from Magnus, queen c7. Defending his c4 pawn, and rook comes in. And Magnus avoids a queen trade and takes the pawn. Now, he's threatening all sorts of deadly discovered attacks with the bishop. He could have apparently in the game gone for this, and then taken both pawns. But this is a little bit dangerous in view of c3. And the bishop is deflected from the rook. According to the engine, this is still winning, but maybe he didn't like something here. He didn't see necessarily the best way forward. So he went for this, brought his bishop back, trades, takes the pawn, and brings in the queen. And now the queen, the bishop, the pawn will do all the damage. And even though you get one check, the king is saved. There is nowhere to check this king. And Magnus wraps it up by just removing the defense of all of Tari's pieces. This is actually a very nice tactical sequence. The king has to run out to d4, a check, and he picks up the rook. And here, Tari resigns because of queen b6, queen b7. You just, again, don't have perpetual. And 3 pawns is more than enough to win this game. Very nice game. A game that wasn't so nice, that literally made no sense to me, was the game between Jan-Krzysztof Duda and Levon Aronian. You know, if I'm saying Duda's name correctly, I will say Aronian's name correctly as well. Aronian. So, this was a 4 knights, which very quickly resulted in a full trade of all of the players' pieces, okay? 7 pawns apiece, 2 bishops, 2 rooks. You know, maybe Duda just wanted a quick draw to move on with life because he's 0 for 2. He actually lost 2 games. But this game got very weird very fast. So the pieces got traded. Again, bishop f4 looks like it's a blunder, but it's not because discovered check, and you would win the bishop. And really fast forward here. 2 rooks and 6 versus 2 rooks and 6. And Levon Aronian just played actively. He activated his rook. It was creeping. And he did something instructive on the queen side. He created this little spider web of pawns where this pawn and this pawn can potentially be targets in the future. Really what Duda should do here is play a4 and rook to e3. So something like this, you know, a4 and rook to e3, and essentially just create a fortress. Play king f3, h3, g4 slowly, and black can never win. I mean, white can never lose, black can never win, and vice versa. But Duda was down 1 hour on the clock here, so very uncertain about the endgame. Didn't like the fact that Levon sacrificed a pawn to damage his structure, and then Levon won the c4 pawn, and force Duda to play like this. And despite this trade, there is enough imbalance in this position for him to create winning chances. So Levon uses these flank pawn breaks. Keep this in mind, to damage Duda's structure. Again, creating doubled sets of isolated pawns, and then transforms the endgame into a passed pawn endgame, where despite the players each having one pawn, it is Levon playing for a win, using his king and this pawn. Now, this endgame is winning for Levon if and only if he plays rook to h5. Rook to h5, because now the pawn cannot go, and if white defends with lateral checks, again, white's king is pretty close. If white's king was over there, sorry, king g2 wasn't played in the game. If white's king is like on that side of the board, this is easily winning. I mean, you bring the pawn down, and you need to know how to build a bridge, which in chess is the term for when you bring your rook to cover against the enemy rook's checks. Okay, so essentially, what does that mean? Let's put that into practice, okay? So in this position, let's say white goes a4. Black plays e3, and white plays rook to b6, looking for flank checks, okay? Now, in this position, what you would do is play rook to e5. You would put the rook directly behind the pawn so that any king move is now just a golden ticket for promotion. If you give me a check, I will go here, you give me a check, I'll go here, and you're just not fast enough. That's really the problem. And if white plays rook to e6 to prevent you from doing that, now you play rook to d5. And you are covering from checks, building the bridge, king to d2, and the pawn will promote. And let's say something like this, you know, king to d3, or king to d2 maybe should also be winning. But let's say king d3, and if I bring my king, you have this. Very important check. Now the king has to be cut off, and you're winning. In the game, we got rook to h7, and this is a draw. Levon blunders with an hour extra on the clock, allowing a4. And now this is a draw, because if you play e3, in this position I will push. If you move your king, I check you. So if you play rook here, okay, now I go for side defense. And I'm in time, okay? I am in time. Because if you play king to e1, okay, I can bring my king, and I'm just stopping you. It doesn't matter. If you go this way, check. If you go this way, check. And my pawn is too close. But then Duda blunders it right back. Rook h7, he plays this. He goes for the lateral defense immediately, and doesn't push his pawn, and this is losing because king d1. And if you bring your king closer, just e2. And you just can't take it. It's geometric. Your king has to get deflected from the rook. And that's it. You just lose the rook. So he just blundered it right back. It's crazy seeing GMs blunder like this, but a very nice winning technique here, by the way. Rook d5 and rook d1, and that's it. And I mean, it's just over. It's just unbelievable to see something like this at this level. But it does happen. And the last two games between Alireza Firouzja and Fabiano Caruana, a little bit of a spoiler. If you know that it's two games, you know that it's a draw. Not an extremely eventful game. Alireza went for like this structure where you play like a reverse Grunfeld. He put his knights out, and Fabiano was creating some tension. There was something kind of cool that happened in the middle of the game, a horsey convention, like this. But not too much occurred. The players shuffled around a little bit, traded, kind of like poked and prodded, but then went forward and went back. And around move 30, just repeated moves. Right here. They had this very strange geometric repetition where, you know, Fabiano is essentially creating some discovered attack on these two pieces and back and forth, and that's that. Which means that we go to their Armageddon game, where Alireza gets 10 minutes, Fabiano gets 7, no bonus time until move 40. And, yeah, on move 40, 1 second bonus. So we get this again, but now e3. And we get reverse Queen's Gambit, he takes. And really just defends that pawn. He just defends that pawn for dear life. But then, Alireza plays something really nice. He plays a reverse Note Boom variation, which is when you sacrifice the central pawns, but you leave a4 and b5. And normally this happens in reverse. Black plays the note boom variation. Look it up if you don't know, spelled exactly that way. And essentially has this structure where you've got connected passed pawns on the queen side. Looks ridiculous, completely ridiculous. But materials equal. And Alireza just begins to push his pawns. And he pushes his pawns, and even though Fabiano gets this really nice grip here, first of all, in this position, there was a brilliant tactic. Knight takes c4, dc4, queen c4. And this knight doesn't have anywhere to go. If the knight goes to b4, you have this ridiculous move, bishop takes g7, king g7, and queen d4. So, you know, no doubt that he missed that. And, you know, you only see that in post-game analysis. I'm not saying I'm better than him. So he plays rook b1 and was very tentative. Firouzja was very tentative here. He really, for a long time, needed to make a certain break in the center. And Fabi himself had to break like this with e5. But they were very tentative until he played e4, and Fabi played e5. And here, Firouzja on live cam, he was like very upset with himself. Very frustrated. And he was like very distressed. He wasn't happy. But actually, his position is completely fine after here. I think he thought he was getting his bishop trapped, but knight c4, and he's not trapped. Because this guy loses a guard. And so he went here, and then sacrificed the rook and got the pawn. And then played queen f5, but again, these pawns are just a nightmare. And then Fabiano fell apart. Fabiano played this, there was this beautiful move, rook to b5, pinning. And then b7, pushing, because the knight can't take. And then queen d6 and queen c8. A brilliant move using the pawn and threatening b8. So Fabiano had to sacrifice the knight, and we got an endgame where 2 pieces for the rook. We saw Fabiano convert that yesterday against Duda, and he did the same today, but in reverse. He was actually the loser. He sacrificed down to rook and bishop in 3 versus rook in 4, but this was not enough. Although Firouzja at this point had less than 5 seconds repeatedly, so it was incredible. He didn't flag again, but being up a piece is different. And he won by shuffling around, gaining some time. The good thing for him is that this is all guarded. And then he, just stumbled into the structure and was able to pick up the pawns. And it was on move 73 that after losing both of his remaining pawns, Fabiano resigned and Alireza won the Armageddon game. So after 3 days of Norway chess, 2 people have 7 points up top. Levon Aronian and Fabiano Caruana. And then you have Magnus Carslen and Firouzja with 6 and 5.5. And you got 2 guys who got 0 out of 9 possible points. That is Aryan Tari and definitely the surprise Jan-Krzysztof Duda. It's been rough for him. Hopefully he bounces back. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts on the thumbnail. And yeah, stay awesome. I'll see you in the next recap.